It all began in the sweltering October of 1932 in the vast, dust-choked plains of Western Australia. The world was in the grip of the Great Depression. Economies had collapsed and hopes for the future were fading. But for the farmers of Western Australia, the crisis wasn't just in bank accounts, it was walking right across their land. Most of these farmers were former soldiers, survivors of the bloody trenches of World War I, who had settled in this harsh landscape under the government's soldier settlement scheme. They were trying to cling to life by growing wheat with their calloused hands. But just as harvest time approached, a massive cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It wasn't a storm, nor was it an invading army. They were emus, 20,000 of them, standing over 2 meters tall. Emus typically migrate from Australia's arid interior to the coast every year to find water. However, the drought that year was so severe that the birds steered their route directly into the lush wheat fields planted by humans. For the farmers, this was a nightmare. For the emus, the wheat fields were a massive open buffet at the end of a 1,000-mile desert journey. They weren't just eating the crops. With their massive bodies and powerful legs, they were tearing apart the expensive fences designed to keep rabbits out. Once the fences were down, the fields were further invaded by rabbits, and everything, in the literal sense of the word, was being pillaged. The veteran farmers, exhausted from trying to repair fences and drive the birds away with rifles, finally gave up. These were no simple peasants. They were men who had seen war and knew the power of a machine gun. So, instead of going to the Ministry of Agriculture, they knocked directly on the door of the Ministry of Defense. "Give us machine guns, and we will stop this invasion ourselves," they said. The Minister of Defense at the time, Sir George Pearce, saw this request as an odd political opportunity. By sending the military, he would both quiet the secessionist voices in Western Australia and give his soldiers a chance for some moving target practice. The minister approved the operation, but with a condition. The farmers would cover the soldiers' expenses, and the local government would pay for the ammunition. They even added a news cameraman to capture this victory for the public. Little did anyone know that this camera would record the most comical defeat in history. Major Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery was placed in command of the mission. Under Meredith were 2 experienced soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and exactly 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The major was so confident that the operation would be over in a few days that he imagined himself returning to the city as a hero after easily annihilating the birds. However, the emus were unlike any enemy the soldiers had read about in their war manuals. The military operation officially began on November 2, 1932, in the Campion district. On the first day, the soldiers cornered a group of about 50 emus. The plan was simple: get the birds within range of the machine guns and finish the job with a single volley. But the moment the order to fire was given, the emus did something that shocked the soldiers. As if taking orders from an invisible commander, the large flock split into dozens of small units within seconds. One group ran right, another left, and others vanished into the scrub. Machine guns were cumbersome tools. They couldn't fire in 10 different directions at once. While the soldiers targeted one bird, the other 49 were already out of range. By the end of the day, thousands of bullets had beaten the air, but only a few birds had been taken down. Major Meredith did not give up. Thinking perhaps we are in the wrong place, he headed south. 2 days later, word came of more than 1,000 emus gathered near a local dam. This time, the ambush was perfect. The soldiers held their breath as the birds approached the dam for water. When the emus entered the deadly range of the guns, the major shouted the order to fire. The guns began to roar, but at that very moment, fate sided with the birds again. One of the machine guns jammed. Only 12 birds had been hit before the remaining hundreds scattered across the plain in a cloud of dust. The army had the technology and the weapons, but the emus had speed and unpredictability. Meredith was starting to get frustrated. He decided to change strategy. Thinking, if they are fast, we must be faster, he had one of the machine guns mounted on the back of a truck. This was perhaps the strangest mobile assault unit in military history. However, the rugged, rocky, and pothole-ridden roads of Australia had not been taken into account. As the truck sped up, it shook so violently that it became impossible for the gunner to hit a large mountain, let alone a bird. Moreover, the emus, with speeds exceeding 50 kilometers per hour, were literally mocking the trucks. During one chase, an emu became entangled in the truck's steering mechanism, causing the vehicle to veer off the road and crash into a fence. The birds, though not physically attacking, were paralyzing a whole military unit with their chaotic presence. In the following days of the operation, Major Meredith began to describe the emu's tactical genius with admiration in his reports. He noticed that each flock had a sentry. This leader bird was usually the tallest and largest. While the others feasted in the wheat fields, this sentry bird, with its 2-meter height, kept watch over the surroundings. At the slightest hint of a military uniform or truck noise, it would warn the flock with a specific cry. Meredith wrote, "Each pack seems to have its own leader, a big black-plumed bird who stands fully 6 feet high and keeps watch. Until he gives the signal, the others don't move. At the first sign of danger, he gives the signal and hundreds of birds scatter until the leader leads them to safety." Meredith recorded the emu's supernatural resistance to bullets with these legendary words. "If we had a military brigade with the bullet resistance of these birds, we could face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. They take bullets, but they don't stop." Indeed, many emus hit by bullets were seen to run for hundreds of meters more, as if nothing had happened. They were defeating even death with their speed. By December, the result of the ammunition spent was a total fiasco. Roughly 10,000 rounds had been used, but according to reports, the number of birds killed was only in the few hundreds. When the news reached the city, laughter and mocking questions began to rise in the Australian Parliament. Opposition members asked if medals would be struck for the emus, and newspapers published cartoons mocking the Army's incompetence. Minister of Defense Pierce could no longer sustain the embarrassment and ordered the troops to withdraw on November 8th. However, when the farmers' cries and the emus' invasion did not stop, the Army returned to the field a week later for a second attempt. The second campaign was a bit bloodier. This time, Major Meredith worked with more experienced soldiers and claimed that about 900 birds were hit. But compared to the 20,000-strong emu army, this figure was like a drop in the ocean. Moreover, the pressure from the public and the press had become unbearable. The image of an army wasting bullets on birds was making the Australian government look ridiculous on the international stage. On December 10, 1932, the Army officially withdrew from the field, waving the white flag, metaphorically. The emus had officially won the war. After this defeat, the government turned to a more logical and economical method, the bounty system. A sum of money was promised for every emu head. Interestingly, what an entire army could not do with modern weapons, trucks, and majors, the farmers protecting their own land did with simple shotguns. In 1934, over 57,000 emus were culled in just 6 months. However, the emus were such a resilient species that even this did not bring about their end. The Great Emu War stands in history books today not as a military operation, but as proof of how ridiculous the human attempt to control nature through brute force and technology can be. Those dusty months in 1932 taught us that technology and weapons cannot always prevail against nature's intelligence and the instinct to survive. If you travel through the western states of Australia today, you can still see those giant birds on the edges of the fields. They are the descendants of those legendary soldier birds who once brought a modern army to its knees, silenced the machine guns, and emerged victorious from the strangest war in history. This story, whenever told, reminds us sometimes the strongest weapon is knowing which way to run at the right time. And perhaps the true victory is not fighting nature, but finding a way to live with it.
Presented by Histveil.